Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about virtual events and media. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about Usdz. This is Apple's format. It's kind of a conversion from Pixar's format and quickly picking up speed. And we haven't seen a lot of people push it as hard as we thought it could be pushed, so we did. So we pushed it pretty hard, and we're going to show you the pipeline that we kind of discovered. I guess what we say discovered as we started working on it, and I think it's going to be a really important format in the future. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Office Hours 2.0. We've been making lots of changes, lots of updates every day, and we'll talk about where we are in the progress. On Friday, we're going to talk about Zoom events and conferences. We have a special guest that's going to come and talk to us about that, answer your questions, so stay tuned for that. And then on Saturday, of course, is education in the second hour. Saturday is the long day. At 10 o'clock, we'll be cooking once again, making spicy scrambled eggs with Damayanti Gajar. I'm excited about that. And then at noon, we'll be returning to Belfast and taking over the Accidental Theatre, and it should be a lot of fun. And we're learning a lot doing that. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's jump into the questions. Bill, what do we got?
Good morning. Our first one comes from Jeff Greenberg. Whoops, I hit the button there. And it says, I'm doing a talk on subscription-free lifestyle for the Final Cut Pro Global Summit. Photopia.com is a great example. What tools or products do you prefer or use that aren't subscription-based? And what can't you find replacement for? The tool does not have to be free.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just thinking about this. It's been an interesting thing, this whole move towards subscriptions. And for me, the key about subscriptions, I'm trying to do as much subscription-free lifestyle as possible. For me, the idea is if it's my content, if it's something I have in intellectual property, I don't like to put it into a subscription system. So I'm a big fan of programs like LinkedIn or other things where you pay a certain amount of money and then that you have access to it as long as you pay. When you stop, you lose access to it, as opposed to some of these things like the subscription NLEs, where if you putting your intellectual property into their program and stop paying, you lose access to it. So that's kind of my philosophy about subscriptions entirely.
Go ahead, John.
Jeff, you're not going to like this answer, but I can't live without Resolve anymore. I went from Premiere to Resolve, and for $300, it's an amazing deal.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I wanted to get on this because it is a super interesting question. There are so many things that we do, but then there's some things that for compatibility, it's you have to get into it, like the Adobe thing. I think everybody has Adobe on at least one machine. I know beforehand we were talking about just renewing our things, and when I renew Adobe every year, it's for several machines. It's a drag.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, second on Resolve, but as far as photo editing, I've had really great luck with Luminar and Aurora HDR from Skylum Software. They are very strong and very well thought out programs and workflow.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, my situation's a little bit different than most, and I try and live a subscription-free life because in my work, I have to work on a variety of different PCs from different manufacturers, and I own about 30 or 40 of them. And a subscription just doesn't work for me, and I always work in a local version of Windows because I don't want, if I've got a computer for a week, I don't want to set it up with my account on it, because then it's going back to a factory or going back to a rental house. So I use Photoshop 7.0, which I bought many years ago, and you can install it on any computer and erase it from any computer when you're done without it checking with the mothership. And I need to have that tool on every PC that I'm using to edit stuff without going to a separate PC.
I have to admit there are, and this is probably because I don't work in it as much, but there's very few tools in Photoshop that I need past 5.5. Photoshop 5.5 was the last update that I really needed. Everything else has been kind of, oh, that's cool. And then I go back to what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Go ahead, Michael.
Yes, I had CS7 from Adobe, and I had a computer locked down so that I could keep running it. But I just erased that operating system and went to Monterey. And so I lost all my Adobe products, and I decided not to do the subscription model. I don't believe in it. I have a philosophical viewpoint that it's just a horrible thing that you don't own your own content, and that the content can just go away on when you don't use and pay for the program. So I use Affinity Phono, Affinity Designer, Pixelmator Pro, and lots of other software that is free. Once you buy the software, then you can use it. I know some people on the panel, their Adobe subscriptions are very important to them, but I just can't support it.
Yeah, I have one Adobe subscription. Anything goes through me. Everything has to go through me if we get something from an Adobe product, because I'm the only one in the company that has an Adobe, and I have a subscription to all of it, just so that I can open any file that's necessary and put it out. So for $50 a month or $52 a month or whatever it is, I have that thing. So that I can open those things. And so there are tools that Adobe has that I need to use. My day-to-day, I try to do everything in Affinity Photo. So like if I'm going to use a Photoshop, and I keep on trying to make that work. There are some things that it doesn't do, but there's things that it does do. Like there's a way to get rid of things from tripods if you're doing 360 in a way that you can't do in Photoshop. So it's got some advantages, and it's a lot faster than Photoshop in a lot of places. And so anyway, but it's a little quirky, and I've been using Photoshop since 1991. So it's hard for me to, like, it's part of it is that 30 years of usage, I have, pieces of my lower brain that just know how to do it in Photoshop. And so there are times when I get push comes to shove, I just go and solve it in Photoshop and go back. But I do think that they've done a great service to companies like Pixelmator and Affinity, because they've created this huge demand for people looking for other things with the subscription. So I will say the Photoshop subscription isn't too bad. Philosophically, you can talk about it, but $10 a month, it's not horrible to get Photoshop. Anyway, Alex.
Sorry, I wasn't quite ready. One thing to mention is that some subscriptions are less bad than others. I think with Avid, you don't have to keep on paying. You still have access to your files, whereas Adobe's is pretty restrictive. So there's probably a kind of halfway house in some cases with some tools, maybe with 3D and rendering stuff. We may get into that later.
Yep. And I do think that I think with some of the stuff that's been expensive in the past, like for instance with Cinema 4D is something that I've subscribed to in the past, and that is it used to cost thousands of dollars to buy it. And so paying a subscription to be able to use it for a period of time makes some sense for a lot of people as well. So I do think subscription does lower the barrier for entry for some people as well. Next question.
Comes from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, here on the panel. He says, is the top third lines the preferred eye line for framing, as is better to drift above or below, thinking particularly about Office Hours 2.0? And what about, here's the core of the question, what about big hair?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
What about hair? Traditionally, this is the upper third on a rule of thirds, and my eye line is right on it. And I don't think anybody's really looking at my forehead. And I think Chris Fenwick would agree that if we were cutting against other people or showing other faces, you're looking here at the person's eyes as they talk to you. If you go below it, it just starts to look weird and funky. So it's better to chop it off there. And you guys with big hair, tough.
Go ahead, Bill.
I agree with that 100%. It really is all about eyeline. And I think the Office Hours panel is a good example. When they cut between us, instead of us hopping up and down and back and forth, if everybody's eyes are close to that standard, everything looks pretty consistent and it's less distracting to the viewer. That said, every rule that you do, there are reasons and there are shots to break it. I think you look at your shot and decide what is best for that shot. If there's content to one side of somebody that you really want to be a part of the shot, or a little bit above and below, you can fake your shot to match the overall scene. But generally, I think it's a good rule.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think what we've been talking about is this guideline. Is it? Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I thought I put it up. Let me just do this. I apologize. I'm going to go frozen for a second. It was not through my switcher. So the guideline, Mitchell, is partially the eye line, but also keep in mind the chin line. I would argue that your shot is still too tight. I think if you zoomed out a touch, you'd get your eye line here, you'd get your chin line there. Like, I can keep my eyes on the eye line, and guess what? That's wrong. So I think all of it is part of the thing. And again, when there's a bunch of people in super sources, I'd be interested in seeing, I don't have it up, but myself and Rupert side by side. I think we both fit the guideline, and I think
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that that guideline, I think, is we're kind of leaning towards of trying to get everyone to kind of fit into that that guideline, because it's going to make more of a difference as we go to super sources. So those are the things that we have to kind of take into account as we go. So we're testing Chris's right now. I think that Chris's is hitting the mark. And so I think that we want to keep on going down that path. All right, let's go to the next question.
If I had to fix my hairline, I would be zooming the light into the shot. Sorry to interrupt.
Yep. But I mean, I think it's just a matter of, it's the head size, especially as we move to, because we do have some folks that are too close to the camera, for what we're framing. Next question.
Moving on, Mike Emmett's up next from Melbourne, Australia. And Mike says, a question about after hours, which is a safe place to test technical ideas. Just wondering if it's an appropriate place to talk about and test creative ideas too, such as concepts for a new show or podcast.
Go ahead, Nigel.
So I think we had an interesting example yesterday. So we had somebody doing wood turning, which I have to tell you was so fascinating that I actually had to do a Teams call, and I managed to do a Teams call and keep the Zoom call up so I could watch him turn these bowls. It was so good.
That's great.
And it really was a thing of beauty. I love watching skilled people. I was very sensitive that if someone had jumped in to have a conversation that was more typical to office hours, they would have been blocked out for an hour or so.
Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
I've had this concept for a long time that ideas themselves are not really very valuable. It's the implementation of ideas that turn them into value and money. But I'm going to pull back a little based on this question and say this. In a forum like this, where you have a ton of people watching from all over the world, exposing an idea that's come to you that may have substantial impact, you're also exposing it to a ton of people who can implement, some of them probably better than you. So I would say it's got to be a mixture. If I was going to do something creative, I would ask for a subgroup and ask them to, if not go under formal NDA, at least, don't take the idea that I'm exposing here, that I have maybe this much implementation ability, and throw it out in front of a bunch of people who might have tremendously more implementation ability than I do, and watch that idea take off. It's a little bit of a balance. I think generally discussing and opening ideas to the world is a really good thing. But if it's really something you're aiming at a commercial use, I'd be a little more circumspect than I would in the past, just because communication has gotten so wide.
Yeah, I have to admit that I have learned over the long period of time that I've done stuff is that I have ideas and I think people are going to take them, and then they don't. Or they don't do it very well, and I've become less worried about my ideas because of that. So I think that you definitely want to do that. I think that the thing that slows you down sometimes is not experimenting with it. I think that experimenting with the idea that you have, talking to other people about it, oftentimes will get it down the path faster and oftentimes more effectively than worrying about whether someone's going to take it or not. There's definitely things that I don't talk about. So I do think that is part of the process. But I think is it something we should do? Absolutely. I mean, if you're willing to show what you're working on and get people's feedback, I think you should absolutely do it in after hours. I think wood turning is great. I think that for after hours, I think if it's semi-technical and it's something that we can explore, I think it's worth it for after hours. And I think if it takes up an hour of time in after hours, I think it's fine. Like if it's, if we're watching it, I mean, I think that what's really interesting is we're a bunch of folks that are very curious and technical, and I think that I don't care if it was someone figuring out the best way to garden. I think that if we started talking about training dogs, I think that'd be probably too much for now. And there's definitely been conversations that I've turned on and I've gone, whoever's host gets a text from me like, okay, let's move this on. like let's move on from what we're talking about right now, And so it's not that everything's open, but I think that definitely the exploration of creative ideas, I think should definitely be part of what we do. Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Comes from Rick Coombs in Columbia, Tennessee. And Rick says, using fiber to extend HDMI. Please discuss if this is possible and what's the distance that can be achieved.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Well, actually, the original HDMI format was an optical format within the cable. So yes, you can still get HDMI cables with the optical functions in them. The limit to how far they will run is dependent on two factors. One is how tight a corner you run the cable through, because you will get light leak from the optical fiber material. Secondly is how long you can afford to have a cable. But once it's light, it'll go as far as you want. I believe Alex knows more about whether it's bi-directional or not than what I do, because I can't remember that part of the optical HDMI section.
Yeah, you can 6 miles. 6 miles is how far you can go with it. You need a proper fiber converter. So Blackmagic and AJA and other companies make fiber converters that are going to be HDMI to fiber. You put an HDMI in one side, you have fiber on the other end, and I think 6 miles is typically what we consider as nominal maximum distance. I've never personally run it more than a couple thousand feet. But it has definitely worked at that distance. And so these aren't HDMI cables anymore. This is a box that's going to take your HDMI and turn it into something. Typically, if it's some version of two-way, it's got to be, we use 2 single mode fiber. Multi-mode fiber is kind of not something we're excited about when we do video. We'd rather have 2 single modes than multi-mode. Multi-mode is more of an IP driven thing, but for video, we generally want single mode. And I have never tried to do it where if I was going to try to control a camera that was HDMI, I would end up converting it to SDI, then using the bi-directional converters that Blackmagic makes, and then send it there and back that way, and you can get 2-way SDI converters as well over fiber. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, if you don't need the bi-directional type to control a camera, you can get some up to, here's one that'll go 12.4 miles for full HD. Now, it's not going to go 4K that distance, and that comes with a pair for $629 that gives you both way. And of course, there are cables that you can buy that have the converters built into the connectors on each end, and of course, you can only run those the length of the cable that you get. Usually, they're about 100 feet or less, or maybe up to 100 meters, but usually 100 feet, because the power that's available to power the chips in each end of the connector is limited. So with the boxes, you power the boxes on each end, so power isn't a consideration, and power isn't running the length of the cable, so you don't have to worry about power drop across the length of the cable, because each end is receiving its power from each end.
Yeah, and we got into the habit of basically, if we had anything more than about 150 feet, we switched to fiber so that we didn't have to think about it anymore. Then you just roll fiber out. And the cool thing about fiber is you can also use different wavelengths. So you can put 8 cameras onto one fiber. There's a couple wavelengths that don't handle hard turns very well, but outside of that, you can get them all working. Next question.
Comes from Guy Cochran here on the panel from Seattle, Washington. And Guy asks, what do you think of Vimeo's new virtual events platform? And has a link there. Have you seen it yet, Guy?
I just saw the link yesterday, and it looked kind of like they were trying to compete with Zoom in some ways. So it had some cool polling, it looked like, and I was wondering if anybody else dove in.
I have not played with it yet. So I think that it makes a ton of sense for Vimeo to go down this path. I pitched them on the idea, like 3 years ago. so it would have been useful, but it was pre-COVID. It was in the before days. So So I think it makes sense for them to go down. It's a good target market for them, given what they're doing. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that I've been a Vimeo subscriber, a Vimeo Pro subscriber for many years now, and also a Frame.io subscriber. And I remember the first time back in the early days that I wanted to take something from my Frame account and move it over to Vimeo, and it freaked me out because I literally clicked a button and nothing happened, and it appeared there. Obviously, they both use Amazon Web Services or one of the big cloud providers. I'm pretty sure it's AWS. And so it was an instant migration. I've always in the back of my mind thought that that's an acquisition that might make brilliant sense. I don't know which direction it would go, but those two things are really could be well integrated into a real powerhouse.
Yep. Next question.
Guy Cochran back again. This time, Guy says, who's the best in the biz? Who gets the call for the biggest shows when failure is not an option?
And you're talking about live streaming, Guy, or are you talking about?
Yeah, last night I was out to dinner with a couple folks from office hours, and a name got thrown around, and I was like, whoa, I had no idea. So I was curious as to who else was in these kind of bigger circles that
what
we
name
never
got
hear
thrown
of.
around? We're very curious.
Has anybody not said 090? Because I'm just going to lay it out there. 'Cause
I don't know if I can say, because it's the people who do Apple's events, and that. So I was out to dinner with Andy Lipnick and Peter. I don't know how you pronounce his last name from the remote span. That Peter, and they were in town to do a gig, and they're using some heavy iron. So yeah, it was just interesting. So I was when I had Google come up and do an event. We had BC Live, and those guys were pretty effective in what they were doing. They brought elementals, and just so I'm wondering who does, like, the Democratic National Convention, who does Jeff Keithley does some pretty big stuff with the World Tennis, so he's a pretty big player, but I'm wondering who gets that call when it's like Fortune 50, failure's not an option, earnings call, that kind of.
We don't do it as much, and we don't. 090 doesn't do as much of the stuff that Pixelcore used to do. I mean, I think for a long time we did the Democratic National and the Republican National Convention for 2012 and 2016, and then we also did some pretty most of Pixelcore's work was Fortune 5. so anyway, so it was, and all of the Fortune 5. So that was what we did a lot of. I think that 090 does a fair bit of pretty high end solutions for it, which I don't know which ones I can talk about, which ones I can't. So anyway, but we solve a bunch of problems there, but I think that there's a couple other companies. A lot of these companies have some of the capacity internally, so it's a mixture. You have to decide: is it the encoding or is it the video production? So the video production is done by one company, but the encoding may be done internally or by another company. I think, some of the companies that we think of as hiring out. I mean, I think that they do still hire out, but a lot of them are doing that are, especially when they're doing more complicated ones, are doing them internally. There's a lot of requirements. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of pre-records as well, like the Apple events. We've been seeing pre-records, and yesterday I was tuning into Microsoft's Ignite, and that one's locally produced as far as I know, because there's been some people in these circles here locally talking about it, and that was pre-records, and it was kind of funny because one of them, the guy actually changed outfits in, like a minute. It's like he's wearing this really stylish outfit that was pretty striking, that it was noticeable. It wasn't like,
right,
like subtle. It was like, whoa, he's doing an interview and he's in a different outfit. And it just seemed like he was there live with us, and then he changed clothes that fast. So it's something to watch out for.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see. I think that if you go into VOD, I think Apple does it the best, which is that they really turn it all the way up. They're not hiding it. They're not having you ever think that it's actually live. It's just a live experience. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Who did the DNC here that actually ended up here in Wilmington, Delaware? I was very impressed with the hybrid coordination. I think it was switched by somebody way out somewhere in the Midwest, but that was a very impressive job.
I don't know if I can talk about that. so anyway, let's go to the next question.
Moving on, Rupert McRae here in the panel from Dallas, Texas, says Facebook has announced it is shutting down its facial recognition technology. Might this trigger a wider shift across the industry? And why do we reach this point? And what is the future for mass market facial recognition?
Go ahead, Stuart.
As far as I'm concerned, this is good news, because I don't think anyone ever trusted Facebook with that data. One of the best functions that Facebook actually put in with that, it was you were able to purge your data from the system and remove yourself from it when they first set it up. But whether they actually did it or not, I don't think. So frankly, this is good news for everybody's privacy.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, Facebook has a big target painted on its back right now, and so much so they had to change their name to Meta, that Congress and is going after them for data mining. And if they're mining facial recognition, there's two types of mass market facial recognition. One where the data is secret or kept and not distributed, and one where it is distributed. And so I think mass market facial recognition will still appear in things like Ring doorbells or devices where the database is kept locally on the consumer's machine and not shared publicly with the company that's doing it for purposes of just identifying people coming to your door and things like that, or security systems that happen within a certain corporation to allow people in and to control security. Of course, it'll be used there. As far as, social media, it may be the death knell because of all the attention that it brings.
No, go ahead, Alex.
I would appreciate it if Facebook, the app, or Meta, the company, they also said within 1 year, if facial recognition has been applied to a picture that we have, we will remove it unless you let us keep it. So an opt-in for previously recognized faces. Because if they're stopping doing it now, they've still got lots of information about on the social graph about who's connected to who through these pictures and when they're all together and all that kind of stuff. So I don't think it'll do that, but that would be nice.
Yeah, they have a lot of useful information. By saying they're not doing it, it makes it less palatable for other people to do it. So it's kind of like kicking off the branches as you go up the stack. They still have the data that's there. I think we have to be pretty. We have to understand that there's a lot of facial going on. It has been going on for a long time. And it's much deep. If you think that Facebook's scary, that's like 25-year-old technology. Like just to be clear, like of what real people who are doing this in a real way are using it. Iris and facial and thermal and everything else is pretty robust, especially around secure areas. And it's the facial stuff is. The Facebook's not doing it. You shouldn't assume that suddenly you can now go out, and not be seen. There's an enormous amount of data processing. So it's nice that Facebook does it, but we shouldn't think that that really means anything for us as consumers. Next question.
And the question comes from Rupert again. Rupert says, why, when not working with all-day events, do you prefer working on morning, afternoon, or evening events, weekends or weekdays?
Go ahead, Alex.
I prefer working on morning events because usually they're over and then I have a chance to either work for somebody else or do something else in the afternoon. So morning is good for me. And in the UK and London, it used to be that stockholder, shareholder rated stuff was first thing in the morning in time for an 8:30 start for when the stock exchange opened. So that was quite convenient. But apart from that, yeah, first thing is good for me.
Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, owning your own company, I don't even know what a weekend is or what a weekday is. I just it could be Christmas Day and I'm in front of my computer working, but I work when the work is there, but because I love it, it's not work. But yeah.
I strongly prefer afternoon events from a pure production perspective. It gives us the morning to be ready. It gives us a regular day, and people aren't coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning. Morning events just mean really, really early load-ins and less room for error. So I generally I'd prefer it. But for us, the day and especially the time depends on the global market. So you do it at 8 o'clock in the morning if you're shooting for Europe. You do it in the evening if you're shooting for Asia and Australia. You do it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon if it's a non-business event in the United States. Pacific Standard, 7 o'clock Eastern Standard. So there's a bunch of things. What drives it mostly is where we think that the viewers are going to be as we do those events. Next question.
George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia says, any thoughts on running Mix Effect Pro on an iPad Mini 5? Is there enough screen real estate?
I think so. I don't know. And since no one else is raising their hand, no one else knows either. We're running, the one that we were running on an iPad was on one of it was a 10-inch. It wasn't the larger one, but it was fine. But I don't know whether it'll run, how well it would run on a smaller one. I know that we moved ours to a Mac Mini M1 so that we could screen share into it and control it. So that was that was what we worked on there. Next question.
Next one comes from Todd Rains in Allen, Texas. And Todd says, starting office hours Zoom this morning, I saw the apps that are accessing content in this meeting. It says Zoom OCS probably, and Learn More shows it is by Richard Williamson. Can somebody help explain what the app is doing?
I don't know what the Richard Williamson part is. There's definitely Zoom ISOs and Zoom OSCs that are coming in from, that Andy Carluccio and Liminal are doing, and that's running the second edit that's going out to YouTube as we're testing new formats, and so that may be what's popping in there. I don't know but I don't know what the other ones are, and I don't know I don't even know where to find that. So that's something we should probably look at, but I don't know actually what that's referring to. Next question.
Michael Drosty of Peoria, Illinois, here on the panel says, at the Final Cut Pro Global Summit, what are you presenting Chris Fenwick?
Go ahead, Alex. Alex is answering for Chris because Chris is not here right now. Go ahead, Alex.
I didn't quite have that ready. He's not presenting any specific content, but he's running a couple of panels. So I'm going to look that up on this link that I'm going to put into Wakana.
We probably probably should have pushed that one off a little bit, but we'll ask Chris again when he comes in. But I know I think one of them he's interviewing Justine Ezerick, or iJustine, as most people know her, and so, but I'm not sure what the other ones are. So there is one other one. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say exactly what you just said. So,
next question.
Bo Cordell of Charleston, South Carolina, up next. And Bo says, looking into investing in a different type of lower Fenwick, a fancy new office chair. What model would you choose, and what extras are worth it?
Go ahead, Nigel. I can't hear you, Nigel.
I got the latest edition of Fenwick Finds, and went shopping for a Mirror 2, which cost me some small percentage of my wealth. But the reality is that I am sitting in this chair like I have never sat in a chair before, and it is now giving me backaches. And a cheap chair, I learned from all of you guys, is not a smart idea. That what makes it so expensive, I think, is adding all the adjustable parts. But it seems to me not having all the adjustable parts makes me head towards regret.
Yeah. Mitchell?
Amplify what Nigel just said. I'm shopping for a chair too, and I've been talking to Chris about his lower Fenwick. And Nigel suggests the full Fenwick, which is all the options, as you just heard. So I'm with those guys.
Go ahead, Bill.
I was talking about this earlier, and I have a Steelcase Leap, which is the equivalent of the Aeron, but from Steelcase rather than Herman Miller. And you don't think you're going to want those adjustments at first. And it's a funny thing, because if you have them and you start finding problems, like let's say I kick back a lot and it flops too much. So yes, you have an adjustment for the amount of the point at which the force on the back kicks it into recline mode. Those little adjustments you think maybe you'll never use, but if they solve a problem and you use them once, even if once you get the chair completely dialed in, you never touch them again. A good chair is so much worth every penny you pay for it. I mean, just think of the incredible amount of time we live in these things, particularly now in the computer and online era. A great chair will make your life so much better. It's always worth it, I think.
I had a less expensive chair, and I was having a lot of trouble. But given how much we spent time in office hours and other meetings, I was having a lot of trouble with my feet and my back and all kinds of other things. And I did get a Mira, with a Mira, I'm quite happy with it. It's been much more comfortable. Next question.
Liberty White in Atlanta, Georgia is up next. She says, can Guy talk about his quad monitor setup and how he uses it? I'm debating whether to go with 2 monitors or, thanks to A. Mitchell's, a quad option.
Guy?
Yeah, this, let's see, let's switch to speaker view so you can see this monitor. It's the LG, and so this is quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. This is a PC up here. This is a Mac Mini down here. And then I use Synergy to run the mouse through all these all the way over to my MacBook Pro, so I can control 3 computers with 1 mouse and keyboard that's down below here. But yeah, that's it. It's a 500 and... let me see, on Amazon, I think it says $600. And these are what Jeff Keithley uses as well. I'll put a link in the chat. It's a LG 43-inch UN 700B. So yeah, that's it.
Great. It's really cool. Next question.
Rupert McRae back from Dallas, Texas here on the panel with the ATEM Mini Extreme was among the best of market award winners for AV technology at Infocom. What are the panel's thoughts on these types of conference awards?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, they're designed, for one thing, is to bring attention to new products, and they're a marketing tool for the company that receives the award. Now, then they can show their, such and such was the best of show winner at the whatever conference it was the winner at. And that's mainly what the purpose of that award is. Maybe I'm not sure how they're handling it in virtual events, but usually they would have an event where they hand out the award, a dinner or a banquet or something. So there's a lot of recognition amongst their peers as to a winner of a best in show, but it's mainly a marketing tool.
Yeah. I think that when you don't have any other reference point, I think that they're useful because you can just say, oh, well, this is something that at least got some recognition to it. When you have a lot of reference, whether you're able to use it or know a lot of other people, I think it becomes less important to me as to whether they win or not. But for someone who hasn't seen it, having that, as Courtney said, having that little medallion on the next ad is useful. It gets people to at least research it. Next question.
From Philip Oler in Katona, New York. Best low-cost IFB for monitoring sound from a Teams meeting on a laptop.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I just bought the Linsol KZ Zax for about $50. And I would tell you, they are really great, but they are quite heavy on your ears if you have got a long day ahead of you. And I bought these in-ear things, and I know that there's other brands of those, which stick in my ear. And if I really have all day on Teams, this in-ear thing makes a significant difference to my ability to keep going.
Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
I'm using one of the super cheap Collins suggestions I got from Amazon here, 2 of them for $20, and it's an in-ear monitor. The only drawback in it has a tip sleeve connector, so if you're plugging it into a laptop, it may create problems without plugging it into a TRS to tip sleeve adapter. But it works pretty well, and since the driver clips onto your shirt in the middle of your back, it doesn't weight, cause a lot of weight in your ear, and the lightweight. It has those two different ear type pieces, the one that fits right in the ear, and then the larger type that kind of fit into the folds of the pinna there.
Good, Bill.
Not to be pedantic about it, but we use IFB and IEM kind of cross purposes. In-ear monitors are what we're really discussing. An interruptible foldback, the IFB, is actually something used in TV stations for a director to interrupt the program feed into a presenter's feed to give them comm directions and things like that. That's a system, and it has nothing to do with the actual in-ear monitor, which is what you're looking for. So if you go looking for IFB on the internet to find it, you may find things that are way too complicated. Most of them have an in-ear monitor as part of their solution, but in-ear monitor will get you a wider range of options.
Yeah, and I'm using the Bumblebees, and they're a little bit more expensive, and they're theoretically the same one as the in-ear. There's been some discussion about that, but to Nigel's point, they're incredibly comfortable, and you can just wear them forever. So and it made a big difference because before that I was constantly pulling them out, like pulling out my IFB and then pushing it back in just to scratch my ear because it was so itchy, and I haven't had that problem since these were sent to me. So next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle. Stewart, who won?
Yes.
I can actually show you who won, but it does require me to just make sure I'm not displaying anything from Office Hours 2.0 in the background. This is my friend Grayson Attridge, and she's standing on, a waterfall. So when you're approaching a waterfall like this before dawn, with all the safety gear and the drone and all the camera gear and what have you, and there's a rock in the path that you happen to miss, and there's also one rock that just happens to be the distance from your feet to your face further along the path, that's who won. But I think the photo was worth it.
There you go. All right, next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he says, if Teams now supports ISO audio via NDI, should we switch to it for 2.0?
Well, firstly, our entire pipeline doesn't use NDI, so it'd be very hard for us to move over. You can do that with Zoom as well, but we don't don't have any NDI in the pipeline at the moment, and so I don't think that would be that viable for us. Also, Zoom OSC is a big piece of what we do, and so getting the ISOs out is one thing. Having the API connections to the app is another. And I don't know if Teams even has any of those capabilities or any kind of open API. And B, there's been so much investment in this. It's probably, if we move to Teams, it would be because Zoom really screwed something up, and it would be 3.0. It'd be a year from now. so we're, like I am definitely not someone who changes direction quickly. So once I've gone down a path, something has to really break before I'll move to another path, just because it just takes too much. It's too much effort. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, has anyone edited comfortably on a 14-inch MacBook Pro on Final Cut or Resolve?
Go ahead, Bill.
So I have not done that specifically on a 14-inch, but I will say, and this is about Final Cut only, since I spend all my life in that program, Final Cut's design is modal workspaces if you choose. There's a thing called workspaces in Final Cut. And one of its great advantages is that you can slim down or pop open a lot of the modules of access in the interface. So I can't imagine a circumstance where smaller screens would not be every bit as efficient, because you could just set up a whole bunch of individual workspaces to take advantage of the amount of screen real estate you have. In other words, getting rid of excess menus and things like that. And you can flip back and forth between those workspaces so easily. Really, Final Cut was designed for laptops, in my opinion, kind of from the beginning. I think it would do really, really well on them.
Go ahead, Alex.
I went from a 17-inch MacBook Pro, which I really did like the size of a long time ago, and down to 15, 2013. And now I ordered the 16 because I thought that was okay. And then I realized that nearly all my time I spent have it at home plugged into a big screen, 5K monitor, that kind of stuff. So I think, well, I changed it to a 14, and I'm going to use my iPad Pro as an external screen, and that'll be fine because they're pretty similar technology. So when I'm at home, I can use the HDR display as the reference display when I'm at home on my big monitor. And when I'm away, I can use the iPad maybe as the reference display when I'm out and about.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, when I tested Isadora on a 14-inch MacBook Pro, I ran it with the default 10-point text size. While I don't have issues with eyesight, I am concerned about eye strain with larger patches. Would it be best to increase the text size if I'm coming from a 15-inch MacBook Pro?
If you're traveling and going somewhere, I think it makes sense to go ahead and you could possibly do that. What I would highly recommend is investing in a monitor that's larger, the 24-inch, 27-inch monitor that you're going to use with your laptop. So anytime you're at home, you want to be on that larger monitor. It'll be much, much easier to work. It's one of the reasons I moved to Mac Minis mostly, is because I don't travel as much and I just can have big monitors. So I think that I would highly recommend that over changing text size. I would really get a 27-inch monitor that you connect that 14-inch to, and I think you'd be much better off. Next question.
Moving on, Braden Barialt, it looks like, from Moncton, Canada, says, for someone just getting started in music production, what would be a recommended DAW, digital audio workstation, that's simple and easy for a beginner to learn, preferably one with a one-time payment option?
Logic. so like that, I mean, without anybody else raising their hand, I'm just going to say Logic. Michael. Can't hear you, Michael.
Or GarageBand, if you can start with GarageBand. It's a little bit simpler and some of the controls are hidden.
I actually I will admit that I find GarageBand harder to use than Logic, but maybe it just could be my history. I find it does so much stuff for me that I have a hard time understanding where I'm supposed to go, and it's not as literal. My kids got really, really good at Logic. I mean, they can make songs with it. They can do all kinds of other stuff. So I do agree with you. And I used to use it more. I used to do like little, opens and closes for events in GarageBand. But once I moved to Logic, after about a couple weeks, I couldn't go back to GarageBand.
I'm the same way. I totally agree.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that really is exciting is where Logic's going related to spatial audio. So there's a lot of tools that just got added that are going to be pretty interesting. Now, next question.
Brian Craig in Toronto, Canada says, what audio monitor do we see when we are testing microphones before the show?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
That's from our friends at Waves, and we lovingly refer to this one as the Mickey monitor. But if you go to
Or the
Waves,
Mickey meter.
Mickey meter, excuse me. If you go to waves.com, you can see that Waves also makes a whole bunch of audio plugins, which are wonderful.
Next question.
Brian Craig of Toronto, Canada says, is that face template available somewhere? And I'm assuming he's talking about the one that Chris Fenwick showed earlier.
Go ahead, Bill.
And yes, on the Discord that Office Hours uses. And if you haven't been to the Discord, you definitely should sign up and go over there. But it was posted a couple of, I don't know how long ago, probably while I was on my break. But it's there. You can download it and use it for whatever you want. It's just white lines on a black background.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, some monitors have it built in. It's called a 9 grid, and just breaks your screen into 9 equal thirds, or part of thirds. And you can do it yourself. Just draw the lines, 9 grids equally.
And the only thing that Chris added was the circle that you want to fit your head into. So which is a key piece of the puzzle. Next question.
Tony Mobley, our friend in Noonan, Georgia, says, best advice for a new Stream Deck user.
Nigel.
Yeah. First of all, remember that when you press the button, you need to check it's actually changed the thing it's going to, because sometimes it's a bit temperamental. Second thing is start playing with really simple things. If you try jump to some of these downloadable pre-configured 58 buttons and 38 macro things, it gets very confusing. So I started by create a screen for Zoom, create a screen for, if you use Final Cut Pro, the 2 or 3 things you press most, and really do it by the apps. Think about the buttons you do most. Don't jump into the really complicated downloadable setups around Companion, because it's a big jump without the basic skills.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, there's an app store that can actually help you with prefigured apps. So for example, the Zoom app, you can get the actual ones that'll give indications. So you'll not only be able to see whether you're muted or unmuted, and also just making custom buttons that make sense to you. You can also toggle some. So sometimes a button to save space. If you have a smaller Stream Deck, you can have a button that starts as one thing and then you toggle it to another thing. You can put 2 things on a single button.
Josh, I got a little distracted. I just got to tell you, you look really good in HDR. Your screen looks really good. I just looked down. I was like, "Wow, that looks good." So anyway, I'm playing out. For those of you watching, we have a second feed. If you go up into Mukana, you'll see a link to the test link, and it's a little YouTube thing that doesn't have anything, that doesn't say anything right before the top of the hour, last hour, and that's to an HDR feed. If you open it up on your iPhone or something, you can see HDR. And some of you, we're learning a lot. We'll talk more about it tomorrow. But I was distracted by how good.
Thanks,
Josh's
Alex.
frame looked.
That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me.
It probably is. All right, next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana is back with, what do you consider minimal usable signal cellular signal strength for HD video streaming?
Go ahead, Rupert.
It's a bit difficult to put this into numbers. You really want to watch out for that the signal strength doesn't necessarily translate to the bandwidth performance that you're going to go get over it. You could have good signal in a crowded location and have very poor bandwidth performance. So however you're measuring it, make sure you're doing those 2 things separately in real world conditions.
You really want to go back to, as Rupert pointed out, to speed of it. Now, if you're talking about it, we can talk about numbers. Generally, if I see less than, if we're just talking about the very simple, if I open up my phone and I see less than 4 bars, I go, this is probably going to be rough. So that's if you're just thinking about just bars. But obviously we can get into more detail there, but that's enough to know usually whether it's working or not. The numbers will just underline that. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota says, on a Windows PC running Google Chrome, when you make a window smaller, many websites, Mukana included, switch into a mobile or app mode. Is there any way to prevent this across all websites?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
It's not just Windows. It's pretty much every modern browser does what's called a responsive website that's designed to look at the display port and determine whether or not the screen is too small to display on your current monitor, or if you get it down small, it'll stack it and do weird things. So it's just a normal behavior of modern browsers to keep the window as big as it can. But when you see those 3 or 4 lines in a small box, that means that it's reduced the menu down to a mobile phone size so that you can see it. And the other thing is Google Chrome. No good.
Next question.
Next question is again from Tobias Moss. He's right back from Minneapolis with, when mounting a pan tilt zoom camera on the front face or head on the front face of a balcony as opposed to underneath it, are shock mounts just as needed, and do they exist for this purpose?
You can definitely get shock mounts that are for any purpose, for what you're doing to dampen any kind of movement. It depends on what the balcony looks like. So if the balcony is stone, you probably have less to worry about. If you're really doing like a balcony that is wooden, that have people walking on it, you probably need something a lot more than a simple stabilizer for your. And the real problem you get into with PTZs is their weight distribution against that stabilizer tends to be problematic. And so, you get into this situation with the PTZ of a hard link to it and the need to stabilize, sometimes becomes pretty difficult to get both of those to work well, because it starts to move and then its center of gravity changes and then it starts to rock. So it depends on how fluid that stabilizer is. Oftentimes what you want to find is a stable place that isn't connected to the balcony if you can. This is where, especially in houses of worship, this becomes a real problem, because you have a wooden balcony that is all wood and there's nothing else to hook to it. And at that point you need some optical stabilization within the camera or the lens. So that's really where the camera and the lens with optical stabilization, it's actually moving the chip based on it. That's really going to do a lot more for you than the camera, but the PTZs don't have those. So what you need to do then is have a PTZ head that you put the camera on the PTZ head, and then the lens on the camera has that optical stabilization. But straight ahead, all-in-one PTZs tend not to handle vibration very well. Next question.
Our friend Tony Mobley had the next two questions from Noonan, Georgia, and I moved one up because it'll make sense that way. The first one is, how many panelists are using companion software instead of Stream Deck software with SD?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
The companion software is just a wonderful way to get to specific devices. Like, there isn't a native Zoom controller for an A10 Mini or for Mix Effects Pro. You really need to go through Companion to make that happen. So it's a good intermediate piece of software to make Stream Deck do very specific things, particularly for our work.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I use Companion for a lot of things, but you can do both. So you can have your Stream Deck buttons, and then you can have additional pages, or basically that's what I do. I have my main Stream Deck buttons with the exception of a couple of companion buttons, and then I go to the next page, and that's where all my ATEM macros are, and other things that are kind of optional. I have just a variety of things. Companion can do so much.
Next question.
Is the second part of Tony's, and he's actually doing a little bit of stealth promotion. How best to promote conversations with Tony Mobley without going too far? Tonight, Jason Sipe is his guest on Office Hours.
Jason Sipe's brilliant, and so I think that that'll be a great one to see. So I think it's at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You can do a search for Conversations with Tony Mobley, and I would highly recommend checking it out. I think that Jason's been in our education discussion in the past, and he's a lot of fun to listen to. So, and he's got a lot of really great ideas. So I would highly recommend it. Next question.
And that's how you promote it. Talak Miguel Lopez Waterman from Astoria, New York, our friend, says, any intention of allowing producers to vote on who gets to answer the questions?
It's up to the panelists. The panelists get to decide who gets to answer the question. It's not they can decide, I want to answer that question or not. For the most part, if the panelists raise their hand in the back end ahead of time, anybody who wants to answer it will answer it. Anybody who doesn't want to answer it won't answer it. So having the producers decide which ones, we give the producers a lot of control. They are asking all the questions, but we can't force the panelists to answer the question if they don't want to. We do have a locking function inside of this, which is to keep things moving forward. I will lock the questions so that we don't have just kind of this dribbling. People. So it's a subtle way to try to encourage the panelists to raise their hand earlier. It screws up our graphic system to be slowly answering, like slowly raising their hands. So we want people to raise their hands we give it a little bit of room, and especially when there hasn't been a lot of people that raise their hand, I'll give it some time. But especially if I think that there's enough people to answer the question like that, these people will answer that question well enough, then I lock it so that we can keep moving, because it allows us to hopefully comfortably increase our question velocity, you know, in a meaningful way. Like, not just, we don't want to accelerate things just for the sake of accelerating, but we also want to keep the conversation moving quickly. And so if I feel like we've got enough people to answer a specific question, I lock it. But if folks get ahead of me before I get to the question, or a couple ahead of me, then we have everybody answer. We're going to go a little over, and then we'll jump into USDZ. But we've just a couple more questions. Next question.
The first one of those is Jonas Dotel in Stuttgart, Germany, asks, is there any way to add Thunderbolt via a PCIe card?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
The answer is yes. There's one of them, Titan Ridge PCI card. This happens to be one that's flashed to also run on a pre-Thunderbolt Macintosh, which is iffy, but will work.
Courtney?
Yeah, and if you're looking for Windows-based ones, here's a couple on Amazon that are Gigabyte, also the same one that Mitch just showed, same brand, for $89, and there's a QNAP for $129 that plug into a PCIe slot and give you Thunderbolt 3 at least. I don't know if Thunderbolt 4 is available, is it?
I don't know. Next question.
Juan C. Robles in Mexico is up next with, has anyone tried this utility? And its generator, he's got a link there. It claims to create LUTs to match colors between different cameras.
It looks really cool. I haven't tested it yet. The first time I saw it is when Juan put it up, so we'll have to take a look at it. I think that anything that's creating those LUTs will be pretty nifty, so we'll definitely dig into it a little bit more. Next question.
And the final one in our regular queue this morning is from Alex Fordy-Gollner in London, and here in the panel, anyone here connect to their router via a power line Ethernet?
Go ahead, Rupert.
Well, I don't, but I have used them in the past in a pinch. I mean, this is where you're going to get Ethernet and able to put adapters over your power outlets through your home electrical system. So I've only used them when I've absolutely not been able to get an Ethernet cable and there's absolutely no other choice. And even then, as a temporary measure, really, you can mesh them together. Don't do that. Use it point to point if you have to. If you can keep them on the same electrical circuit, that's ideal. Sometimes they work better when they are not plugged in through surge protectors, so you can get them as directly connected to the wall as possible. And just watch out for random interference. You know, you have a microwave go off somewhere or some electrical noise on your electrical circuits, and it could just change the whole thing. So in a pinch, but not long term.
Okay, that's good. And we're gonna, before we get started here, we're going to test Jesse. Jesse, can you? Were you in the first for the mic checks?
No, I couldn't get there early, so
no, that's fine. That's fine.
Doing my test now. Hopefully, I sound okay. I'm looking at the meter. It looks like minus 22. Pretty good.
Yep, you're talking a little into the mic, so we're getting a couple pops. You might want to put it off to the side just a little bit, just to the side. There you go, and just try it again.
Okay, I'll keep talking.
Yeah,
Let's see. How's that sounding?
It's good.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, and we wanted to bring Jesse in because he was part of the project that we worked on, and so the second hour is really based on. I think Tim would like to drop out here. Can we? I can't move him because I don't have the access. It screws up my whole. Yeah, okay. It's important for whoever's co-host or host to do that quickly because I can't move anything when someone raises their hand. And for the panelists, don't ever raise your hand once the show starts because you just have to drop out. Because if you're going to drop out, you just have to drop out. Don't raise your hand because it screws up my system. So anyway, limitation of Zoom. To go back to what we were talking about here. What we're talking about is USDZ, and USDZ has been slowly rolling out over the last 5 years. So this is nothing, it's new to us today because we're going to talk about it here, but it is not new. It has been out. Now this is based on the USD format, which is the universal scene description that was created by, I believe, Pixar was what, kind of where it was developed. And the idea was that can you move your geometry? Can you move your textures, lighting, animation, all of those things from one place to another. And so USD allowed that to happen, and allowed people to move these models around. Apple took that format and created what's called a USDZ, and it's just literally it's USD zipped. So it just zips that file together so that it's all, instead of a folder structure, it's all just one unit that can be moved around. Now, this has been something that Apple has been rolling out very slowly. They introduced USDZ, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, and then they have been slowly adding more tools to that process. So they've added Reality Creator, Reality Converter. They've also added this last, in every WWDC, you see a new set of tools that are released for what we're doing. The last one was the photo to image, or what was it? No, I can't think of the name of it, but it's the photo modeler. So basically doing photogrammetry. And what they've done is they've released a library that lets other developers take pictures of almost anything around you and just turn it into 3D models. And that we haven't seen a lot of tools for that yet. But we're probably going to see a lot of them over the next couple months. Now, we didn't use those tools specifically. What we were doing, and it was a mixture of work from Chris Fritchie, Alex Golner, Jesse, it was and then Aaron Huselage also was part of that process. We started figuring out, like, we had a project that basically had a bunch of 3D in it. And instead of using traditional 3D, we decided to go down the path of, let's do this all in USDZ. Let's do it in motion. Let's make that work. And so we went down that path, and we produced what I think is some of the best models that we've seen. I think that one of the hard parts has been, for a lot of the stuff, is that people don't, what's been put up so far as an example of what can be done has not been the most compelling, in my opinion. And so I think that that's been a real challenge. I'm just trying to open up interesting. Anyway, so let me show you an example here. So if I cut to this, this is one of the models that we built for this. And if you see me rotating it around here, now you may think that I'm in some kind of 3D viewer. I am showing this to you inside of Preview. So this is just Apple's, standard Preview app. And you can see that this is a very detailed model. And this is something that Chris Fritchie put together. And he'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But it is the thing that's interesting about this is that it is not I didn't know that we could get to this level of detail, within USDZ. Now, this is what's called the Clarity node. This model that we produced, it was for a company called Clarity. This is just as an aside, in case you're wondering, I know that there's going to be a question like, what is the thing that you're showing? What this is a air quality monitor. So it has it'll take the air in down here. It's solar powered and cellular powered. And so you can just put this you don't need any wiring. You just put it on a light pole or a telephone pole, and it just starts pulling information about the environment around it together. And so we were building a video about that. And again, they were kind enough to let us, I just want to thank Clarity, because they were kind enough to let us show you the model and talk about it here. But this is, this is one of the models that we built, to make that work. Now, Jesse also built, this is something that Chris Fritchie put together based on the CAD drawings that we got. Jesse also built some other things that were a little bit more fun. So let's see if I can pop this up here. I don't know where that's going. No, there we go. Let's see here if I can pull this down. Let me cut back here. Here we go. This is I have this new screen thing that Andy was suggesting that pops things over. So this is an example of what Jesse was showing here. So Jesse built this. And what you see here is this is kind of a fun, little example. So you can imagine this as a little icon on top of a map. And Jesse built a series of these as well. And so again, what you're looking at is coming directly out of Apple's Preview. And the reason that that's important, as we work forward, is that's not a specialized viewer. That's not it's something that's sitting inside the operating system. And you can literally take these models and text them to somebody, and they can open them up double click on them, and they can simply open them up in preview. They can open it up on their phone and take a look at it. And so this is all being supported inside the OS. In fact, I think if someone wants to post that link again in Mukana, Clarity has made the first model that I showed available on their website. So you can actually go and download that from their website and actually look at it. And I tweeted it out this morning. So it's a pretty interesting thing. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Is that showing ambient occlusion on there too?
It is.
That is amazing.
So what Mitchell was asking about is that, and that was a big piece of what we had to work on, is what we call ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion essentially is it looks at surfaces and it looks at how close those surfaces are to each other. So it's not real lighting, it's fake lighting, fake shading, but it says, there'd be more shading going on if these two surfaces were close to each other. And so it takes that into account, and then it bakes it into the textures so that it doesn't, you can just kind of throw it up there. And so that really created a lot of a different level of realism that's there. And so all of those things are baked in. Now, what I will say, and so the reason that we're showing this, before we kind of get into it, I'm going to have both Jesse and Chris talk to it a little bit. And I think Chris has a couple things he can show you. The thing that is interesting about it is that I think that I'm going to show you this in motion. We did all the animations. I did all the animations for this in motion. In fact, I'll show it to you real quickly here. So here's motion here. I'm in the motion interface, and you can see that this is, if I just grab onto my rotate, this is a 3D model. So this is a 3D scene inside of motion. And this is with one of the modules connected to it. So I'm able to actually do all of the animation that I was doing. And you can these darker areas where these objects are, that's the ambient occlusion that we were talking about before. So if we can zoom in a little bit, and there's a lot of detail there. So you can see that this is if I grab onto this, if we rotate around, it's a lot of detail in that 3D. And this is all not in a 3D package and not being rendered over time, but this is all rendered in real time as fast as I move my mouse inside of motion. And you can actually export this from motion into Final Cut. So, I think most of the examples that we've seen up until now, I haven't been, as impressed with as far as, what was, the models that even Apple puts into their devices. I haven't been, super impressed with as far as how they look. When we got to this, where we had something that looked not maybe photoreal, but very close to photoreal, it was really kind of a game changer for what we were doing. And again, when you look at this ease of use, one of the things to think about is it's not just right now it's in motion, but what happens when it ends up in things like Keynote and Pages and all kinds of other things where you can have those models be imported and be able to rotate around. And so I will say that doing it in motion means that now you can develop this stuff, and it still takes a little bit of work and a really skilled operators to build this. But once you develop it, you're now handing a 3D scene to someone that has a $50 application that can actually do high quality renders out of it. So it's a pretty exciting thing to think about. So anyway, that's the overview of why I'm paying attention to it. I think that as it becomes more available across the Mac OS, I think that you're going to end up with an incredible demand for models. And Chris can talk a little bit about it. I think that even some of the folks in your company saw some examples of what that looks like, Chris. And they might be interested. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, they were forced to see them. So, so my name's Chris Pcie. A lot of you know me, but anybody watching who doesn't. So what Alex talked about is really just like he said, an overview. There's a lot going on in the scenes behind that to get to that part. And Alex, how do you want me to approach?
Go ahead and show a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the pipeline.
Okay.
So yeah, of what it took, because there were a lot of dead ends.
Yeah. So generally, and unfortunately, I have to add in the what you have to do to get to these spots as well. Okay. So generally what happens when somebody asks you to do something like this is you're going to receive a CAD model from a client/customer.
Right.
The CAD model may or may not be at what we would call full resolution. And what I mean by that is a lot of times in manufacturing, Models are only modeled to the extent to get the drawing to make the part. So they might have nuts and bolts in there to fill out the BOM, but the nuts and bolts won't have threads. They might have hole placement there, but the holes won't be threaded. And all those things come into play because when you bring it into a package like this, where you need to rotate it around or zoom in or pull parts apart, if you just see a hole that doesn't have threads for where a bolt goes, you're not going to think that that's actually a bolt hole. You're going to think that's a through hole for a pin or something. So you have to actually take the time to put those in. So there's a lot of cleanup that has to be done on the front side for models, not because the models were designed wrong, but because they were only designed to the level that they need for manufacturing. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I've been doing mechanical design work for 21 years. And for 16 of those 21 years, that's all I did. I designed to the drawing, just to get the drawing. The first time I had to render out a part from one of the CAD models I did, I was like, holy cow, I got to change the whole way I model this stuff, because now I'm having to redo my work on the back end, which I don't want to do. But a lot of the times, these CAD models, you're not going to take the time to put the threads in because that would really complicate your drawings. You're going to show a hole with a dotted line and you're going to call out a thread detail. I'm only saying this so you know up front that don't be under the impression that you're just going to receive a model and then you're just going to hit export to USDZ. It doesn't work that easy. I wish it did, and it can, if you're producing models for somebody, or if you talk to your client ahead of time who's producing the CAD models, they can design to that level of detail, but that doesn't mean it's going to be done up front. Okay, so with that said up front, do you want me to just jump in and show stuff, Alex, or is it better
let's walk people through it. Let's go ahead and just a couple minutes of just showing a couple things there.
So
and then
here's the
Jesse,
model.
just so you know, Jesse, I'll be coming to you next just to talk about. You can show if you have something, but otherwise just talk about your pipeline.
Yeah, cut me off because I ramble.
Yeah.
This is the physical model. So when Alex asked me about this, he says, "Hey, can you model this?" He sent me a picture. Now, there's not much you can do from a picture. So the first thing I asked him was, I need a physical model because I need to measure it. I need to confirm everything's right. I need to see the textures. One of the things you guys are going to learn very quick is that to make a USDZ successful is you have to texture it, and it has to be textured to a level of detail that looks correct.
And this is what I think has been missing in many of the models that we've seen so far as examples for USDZ is good texturing. It's complex texturing that includes normals and includes ambient occlusion, includes all the other things that really make it stand out.
Yeah. So for example, when we did the solar panel, this has a hex grid on it that has depth. So, that was something that was designed inside of Substance Painter to make that look right. Otherwise, when I sent over the first model to Alex, I set this up in the studio and I lit it from both sides and from the top so I get no reflections. I took a picture of this and I just mapped the picture onto front of a polygon.
Which is what most people do. And it was okay.
It looked okay. But the one we did in Substance looked better. Okay, so with that said, let me switch over here. So what happens is I take that physical model and I bring that into my CAD software. I already know there's questions in here about which CAD softwares packages to use and all that. I use a package called Autodesk Inventor. It's quite pricey. I doubt anybody here is actually going to fork out the money for that, but it's what I do for a living. And I brought their model into this, and then I added detail to where detail needed to be added. So for example, here's, now we're never going to see the threads on this bolt, and we are going to see the head. So I left this one as it is. Because it's not much detail that you're going to see here on a bolt on the back like that. But what we are going to see detail on, clicked the wrong part here. What we are going to see detail on is something like this connector, where this does have knurling on it. It does have pins where this connects into. It does have a specific shape, and for example, this was a purchase part. So you may receive a purchase part. This was really just a cylinder. It had a little hex on the back, which is not going to look right in a finished model. So a little bit of time had to be taken to get this one to look right, because we're back to that same thing that I was telling you guys versus the drawings versus the actual model that people are going to look at. One is done to get a bill of material. One is done to get a where you want to actually show something that looks like a picture. Now, once you guys get all this modeled in here, you guys can see there's quite a lot of parts that go into this thing. I'll expand some of these folders over here. You guys can kind of see what's going on here. There was, when it started off, it was just this one box that we were doing. And then what had happened, let me zoom out here. Then what had happened is Alex said, well, we need to add in, there's a sensor that's for this. And then there's going to be some cables that connect these things together. And then, oh, hey, by the way, there's 2 other boxes. We'd like to show those. So, and then all these get mounted on a pole, and they wanted a clean way to show, basically to, all right, one second. Basically, you wanted to be able to show all this mounted on a pole. So that's what you guys are looking at. Let me fix this one real quick, because that one thing keeps turning off on me. Well, I'm going to leave it out for right now. You guys will see what I'm talking about.
And then this is an inventor. We're gonna keep moving here. So so you have this all
CAD.
set up.
Then
this is all
whole,
in your CAD. Yeah, go ahead.
this whole thing gets exported out into now you got a software package like Modo. And I've just got the one up here, Alex, just to show this node instead of showing everything.
Yep.
So everything comes into Modo, and Modo really is just kind of a pass through for this, because I'm literally just importing my CAD model into this. And let me turn on this and the solar panel so you guys can see. Here's where kind of most of the work gets done. For example, let me pull up this thing right here. So this is the enclosure. This is a pretty important part of the whole node, because this is what people are going to see. When you pull this into something like Modo or Blender or Cinema 4D, you're going to be able to have this. I'm going to have an export option right here. If I go over to export, I can go right down to USDZ. The problem is when I export this to USDZ, by default in a system like Modo, where they haven't really put a lot of time and effort into this, it just exports the geometry. There's no textures, there's no color, there's no nothing. It just comes through as like a default gray.
And this has been this was one of the challenges, both with all the platforms that we used, was actually dealing with the idiosyncrasies of USDZ exports at the moment. This is a still brand new, everything's very soft. And so it is a thing that we're still kind of working through as far as making that work. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to show it today.
Yes. So before this can even be exported, you have to do something which is called Uving. Now here's where everything gets complicated. So everything was easy up to this point. You saw what Alex showed on the screen. You're like, great, I can do that. I'm going to jump right into that. Then you get to this spot. This is really what separates your models from the rest, or your company's models, or your client's models, because everybody wants their stuff to look the best and to look as close to photoreal as possible. And you can get photoreal. It just depends on the lighting. The lighting's your big thing there. But this is what they call a UV. And if you don't know what a UV is, if you imagine a Pringles can and it has a lid and it has a bottom, if you were to cut the top, here, I'm going to switch back to me. If you were to cut the top of the Pringles can off and the bottom, and then you cut down the tube and you laid that out, that's a UV. A UV is a way to unwrap a model to make it into a flat layer.
And it's the coordinates for the textures. So we're going to wrap textures onto it. You have to have something, you have to have some kind of 2D space that you can actually paint that's going to look correct when it wraps back onto the object.
Paint, or in Photoshop, you just add your textures there and then export those back out. Okay, so we come into here, and let me throw, just so you guys understand what I'm talking about, I'm going to throw a material on, a UV material onto this so you guys can understand what's going on. So we'll throw this on there. And what you're going to see here is a series of, guys see that okay? Sorry.
Yep.
I mean, I have 43-inch monitor, so I can see it just fine.
We see it.
So what you have here is a series of squares, and this is kind of like a traditional UV texture. And you'll notice that all these squares look square and they're all the same size. that's the difference between UVing something and not UVing it. Let me show you what happens when you don't take the time to do that. This only take like 30 seconds.
And really what we use those squares for is while Chris is doing that, I'll just fill. So when you don't have those UV textures, it's doing the best it can to figure it out, but the computer doesn't know what it's looking at oftentimes. And so it'll start stretching those. And when they're stretched, it means that any texture that goes onto it is going to be stretched as well. And that's usually not what we want. We don't want things to be all stretched across that surface. It'd be like a piece of plastic pulled the wrong way.
Yeah. And you'll see this real quick. So all I did was I did an automatic UV cubic. This is what most people will do by default. And then what you would do is you'd end up packing these UVs. And when you do that, you're going to the software is going to say, hey, here's all the surfaces on the part. Now, watch what happens when I change this texture from the first UV I did to the second UV I did. You're going to notice that I no longer have squares here on this surface. And these are all stretched. I kind of have squares in this back surface, but this surface already kind of had a square shape.
Right.
And this is what happens. And this is where a lot of UDZs fall apart, because any image you put there is going to be pulled sideways. It's kind of like take your face and just squish it down. Okay. So with all that being said, what happens is then you come into then what we found out, I guess I'll talk a little bit about this. Then what we found out is I brought this into a software called Vectory. And I'm not dogging Vectory, but Vectory was a software that when I searched, hey, I'm on Windows, I need a UDZ package. I'm not a Mac. I don't have a Mac, so I'm on Windows. This one came up, and there was a lot of work that got put into that. Unsuccessfully, there was just not a good way to get textures out of the
close.
system. It was close, but it's you could definitely tell by looking at it. It was just like, it's like you want to like it, but you don't. So then, just out of the blue, somebody said, well, why don't you just bring it into Substance Painter? And I always thought Substance Painter was something that was kind of tied to Unreal Engine, and they kind of were their own
and this is a newly Adobe product. Substance has been around for a long time, but Adobe bought it in the spring of this year, and so it's Adobe Substance, and they have they have Painter as one of the 3D tools that they've made available.
Yeah, there's Painter and Designer and Set and all that stuff. But at the last time I had heard of Substance was a couple years ago, and I remember it was like $500, and I'm like, well, I'm not going to spend $500 just to make for a project. Anyways, I found out it was Adobe, so I went ahead and bought the subscription. So the way it works in Adobe is what you do is in Modo. Let me run back. Oh, sorry, you guys can't see the screen. Run back to Modo real quick, and I'm going to let's just use one of the ones I've already done because that'll be easier because I already messed this one up. So what happens in Modo is in Substance is you come in and you open, and I exported from Modo an FBX file, and with an FBX or an OBJ or whatever, you can use either one you want, but your UV map travels with that file. So just in case you didn't know, you can go from Modo to Cinema 4D, you can go from Modo to Blender, it doesn't matter. You can share those file types and the UVs travel with them. So let me come up here, and we're going to grab one of these FBX files, if I can find which one I need. Oh, I need import, not open. Sorry. Here we go. All right. So when you come in the Substance Designer, you're going to have a bunch of windows here. I always go up to the highest resolution I can. Alex actually asked for something smaller because what you'll notice is.
So one of the things we found was that at 2048, I mean, you can do 4096. At 2048, it looks great in motion, but it will not open on your phone. So we found that 1024 was, for the texture size, was what we needed to get it to actually open on the phone.
Yeah, so the UDZ models, if you want them to open on your phone, there's a hard limit at 50 megabytes. If it's 50.1, the phone won't run it. It has to be 50 megabytes or below. Hopefully, with popularity, this will go up because you can quickly run out of 50 megabytes pretty fast. Yeah. All right, so you bring it in here, and then you go and you select your model. Let's go back to that folder that it was in. And I'm just going to grab this first one here, which happens to be that, that housing. So I've selected my file and I've told it my resolution, and then I get to pick a template. And in this case, I'm just using metallic roughness. So I'm going to hit OK. And then what happens is it's going to load your model in there, and you're going to think, holy cow, that loaded the whole thing. So that's fine. No, here we go. Oh yeah, it actually loaded the whole thing. That's fine. We'll just run with this. So this loaded the whole assembly there. And you're thinking, holy cow, I'm doing great. Right now it's showing me the UVs, but I can go to the 3D only, and here's my file. And to rotate this, I'm just holding Alt or Control or whatever it is on your Mac and zoom in and out. And you're thinking, hey, I'm almost there. This looks great. The problem with this is if I go over here and I'm going to use a smart material so you guys can kind of see what happens here. Something that has a texture on it.
And one of the great things about Substance is not only that it has got some tools that are useful, but it has a ton of textures that are really well built. These aren't just image maps. These are textures that include normals, include bump maps, include specularity. So when you add something to the surface there, it's adding all the attributes that you want to control over it, which is something that we haven't, it's just harder to set up in other platforms.
Yes, so I've dumped a texture on here now.
And Chris, we're going to give you about another 2 minutes.
Yeah, keep in mind this part has been UV'd. So when the texture comes on here, these octagons look like, or these hexagons look like hexagons. They don't look really stretched. And then you go through here and you map your materials on. The problem you run into real fast, what most people don't do is they don't bake these textures on first. This is something I can talk about in the after hours if somebody's really interested in this.
Right.
Because I could go on for another 2 hours from right here, but this would be a good place to cut off.
And we're gonna do a lab. The main thing is there was one little thing that was important there, though, is that number one is you need to bake the textures, which are going to get your ambient occlusion, and you can kind of set those up. And we're going to do a lab. The main thing we wanted to show is like what it took to get it through there. So from there, it was a matter of baking the textures, and then as well, and we'll answer more questions if you have them, but also exporting. We still have to export via texture, right? You're exporting textures.
Yeah, you export textures.
So you don't have to export the model. This is the funniest part of this. But this is why we're doing this, is so that this is the little tip here, is you export the textures, and then in that you set it up as USDZ. It exports a whole pile of textures that you don't need, and a USDZ model that you do need that has all the textures on it. So it's, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, a good way to look at it is right now you're looking at a 3D model that has surfaces. So for example, this enclosure has a top surface and an inner surface. But when I map the textures on there, the textures cover all the surfaces. So when this thing gets exported, it's almost like the shell that made up the model goes away, and you just see where the textures were on those surfaces, and that's really all it's exporting. So Apple's, or whoever, Apple or Pixar found a way to not have to really export both, because I don't think both data is going with it.
I think the geometry is there. Anyway, it's a fascinating puzzle.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting
in that area.
Do you want me to show what it looks like on your phone? Because I can do that real quick.
While you do that, I just want to see both first from Jesse and then Alex. Jesse was exporting, as I mentioned, the house, and now you did those in Cinema 4D. Is that right, Jesse?
Yeah. So just, I don't have any slides, but to give you an overall of my workflow, the task on my end wasn't so much to create, like Chris did, a hyper literal representation of an object that is being manufactured. For me, it was to create 5 abstract versions of different building types. One was a house, one was a hospital, one was the Clarity Station. And to do that, we wanted to get this abstracted view to the client relatively quickly. And I'm fast at SketchUp. SketchUp is very well suited towards very quick models. So I generated the 5 different models, got them in front of the client, and we were able to get quick feedback as to whether they thought that was abstracting it in a way that made sense to them. So we more or less nailed down the form of the buildings, but then there was a desire to have it look more cartoonish, more almost like a kid's toy, more friendly. And for that, SketchUp is not great. SketchUp is used a lot in architectural modeling. It's got hard edges, but it doesn't have that softer kind of rounded corner look. So for that, I went into Cinema 4D, and Cinema 4D is nice in that it works in parametric objects that you can dial in the level of roundness, the level of detail, and it's got a much nicer rendering engine. So for me, the workflow was SketchUp into Cinema 4D. Unfortunately, as Chris and Alex are saying, the software packages themselves cannot export directly to USDZ. You have to do these interim steps.
They do it. They just don't do it very well. So I
guess it depends on SketchUp at the currently doesn't have a USDZ export.
But like Cinema 4D and Modo and other will export out on USDZ, but they don't import it. They don't export in a USDZ that we can use the way that I'm showing you, the way where all the textures are all embedded and everything else and easily opened in Motion or Preview.
The closest one is Fusion, Autodesk Fusion, but you're limited to one single texture that has to be on the entire model, and there's no ability to UV.
So then, Jesse, you brought that also into Substance, is that right?
Right. So initially, I was creating USDZs by exporting a GLB from Cinema 4D, bringing that into an Apple product, which is Reality Converter, which could create the USDZ. The issue with that was we became fascinated with the rendering quality that you get when you have ambient occlusion. And that Reality Converter cannot do. Right. So then I was bringing it into the Adobe Substance program, and I tried to bake in ambient occlusion with everything that I had in Cinema 4D, and I learned that ambient occlusion requires UV maps. So that's where the real fun began, and I had to revisit the models within Cinema 4D, create UV maps for all the different surfaces, and then bring it back into Substance, which would let me properly create a USDZ that had that shadowing.
And then I want to this is the tricky workflow is that you have to get all these pieces together. None of these apps do it all by themselves. Now, there are some apps that Maya and Houdini, for instance, have much more refined tools related to USDZ right now, but they're a lot more complicated and a lot more expensive. So we're trying to have these kind of less expensive ones be able to actually piece this stuff together. The main thing is that we have to create the geometry in one place, and sometimes you even go to another place to define the UVs. Substance will not create the UVs well. I mean, it will try. It's horrible. Anyway, and so you have to.
It's horrible on complicated objects. It's pretty simple
everything
on a
that
cylinder.
Everything I've done with Substance where I hit create the UVs, it just blows them all up and does all, has all this, it just gets confused. I mean, I did pretty simple models.
Well, part of that is if your model is CAD data, it's in triangles, and triangles have there's no direction to how to link the polygons together. If it's in quads,
technically
you have defined anyways, that's after hours discussion.
Yeah. Anyway, so so Substance needs you to bring them in as USDZ, but you need Substance to add the textures, and you need Substance to add the ambient occlusion, and you need Substance to do the export, to that process. And so that was the thing that we want people to know, and we're going to do labs on it in after hours and so on and so forth in the coming weeks, is that you have to have something that's going to build it. That could be Blender, Cinema 4D, Modo, CAD Pro. You have to have something that does the geometry and the UVs. Then you have to have, right now, in a small package, relatively inexpensive, Substance is the only solution. And then you export it out, and you'll end up with and you export it out as a texture. And USDZ is one of those things. And then you have it there. And Chris, you have an example of that. And then we're going to jump to questions here real quick. We'll have Alex, I'm going to have you give any last things here, and then we'll jump into the questions. Go ahead, Chris. Do you have were you going to show the phone? I can't hear you, Chris. I don't know. We can't hear you. I don't know if you're, did we lose you, Chris? Oh, there you go. So that is, I don't know what there. Well, John's showing it in the phone now. So I think, no, you're in preview, John?
Yeah, I just pulled it up on preview. It's working great.
Yeah. And so it's kind of amazing. Now, the other cool thing about this, before we jump into the questions, is where this went. So if you go to the website that we posted earlier or that I tweeted out, one of the things you're going to see is Clarity's website has a whole bunch of images and you can download the USDZ model, but it has a bunch of images. All those images were generated from that 3D package and for that 3D object by the client, by Clarity. So Clarity now that they have that object, instead of going out and taking photos of the object every time they want a new angle, they can simply just rotate it around and hit go, and render it out. And so for what it gives to the clients is pretty profound. Alex, did you want to have any last notes before we jump into the questions, Mr. Goldner?
Yeah, I can just show a little bit about grouping in motion and a little bit about that. So if I can't show my screen at the moment because I said no earlier, so I don't know if you can enable the screen on that.
Someone has to make you co-host, I think, to do that. Can we? I can't do that. Who's got host or co-host?
Guy does, and he's doing
good. Okay, good.
Cool. Okay. So here we are in motion. As you saw before, we had a generally light background for the video that I was working on, and the video is all done completely in motion. So I'm going to show you that we have the node here. You can see this layer here called node, and I actually have my keyframes on. I did a bit of keyframing here, and you can see that I can obviously animate using normal keyframes, position, and rotation of the model. This is using a slightly older version of Motion, an older operating system. So I think the ambient occlusion stuff isn't being rendered here, but then I restarted in Big Sur and re-rendered output so that it's you'll see darker area here and stuff like that. So watch out with your versions of Motion and operating system because I'm using a pretty old one. But this actually, if you look at this layer here or this layer here, this is actually a group. So what I did was I was actually I imported the main node and the solar panel separately and the aerial separately, which means that if I select the, let's see, I need to turn it down here so you can see it, and I can select the solar power, you can see that I actually, if I can animate things on, just very simply, just animate things on like this, so it animates into place. And the same with the, let's see where it is, the antenna group. So part of the job of, I'll just stop sharing now. Part of the job of doing stuff in motion is getting multiple parts together and getting them to register properly and getting the scaling working. And then once you've created a group, then you can animate and move with individual parts.
The register and getting the thing. So Motion, when you bring it in, arbitrarily decides what scale it should be in. So it just goes, oh, I think that this should be times 8 or times 3. I think it's to make it so that if you brought something really big or really small in, it would fit. So if you go into the object area, the object options, you can set all of the scales the same, and then they will all fit together. But it took us a little bit of time to figure that out. It was not it was kind of this arbitrary. And Chris is like, oh,
that was a
gosh.
50-hour frustration.
Sorry.
Is what that? No, it's not sorry. It's,
and Chris said it's definitely Motion that's doing this, and I was like, no, it's not Motion that's doing this. There's something wrong with the model, and then there was a meek email from me going, it might have been Motion that did that. So anyway, yes, not that Chris is bitter. The other little gotcha that we noticed is that geometry with a lot of long polygons in general will create a lot of aliasing. So we had to simplify the models. Jesse had a lot of stuff around the edges, lots of like rounds on the edges, because that's what we wanted that house to look like, be round and kind of cartoony. Those rounds just create lots of aliasing, lots of jagged edges because of the real-time renderer. Motion doesn't oversample, which means it doesn't render at a higher resolution and then zoom it down. It just renders out what it has. And you see the same problem with Unreal as you see with Motion. One of the big problems with Motion right now is that it doesn't have an oversample setting. So what I had to do for the actual final piece is I built a lot of some of the animations as well. And as I built those, I rendered them all out at 8K. So I rendered everything out at 8K, and then through compressor pushed them down to 1080p, and then put them into the thing. And that did the oversampling and produced smooth. So it was a manual oversample. So to get rid of the aliasing that we had. But that's exactly what Motion should do eventually. When you hit render, you want to have it do that thing if it has. And I think that now with M1s and everything else, we can make that work. But as you can see from what Alex was showing, and Jesse and Chris, what we wanted to show is that there's some little kinks in the road to make this work, but you're using 3D in a $50 application. It's kind of amazing. And again, I think that this is going to be much more widely used in the future. I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to jump to questions, and we'll see if we can cut through them. Let's go, Bill.
Okay, the first one comes from Alex, 4D. And it is there a simpler CAD application that can be used to simplify client-supplied CAD models, turn off layers, delete selections so as to save individual parts?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so Autodesk Fusion 360 is probably what you want to look at. There's a free download for that. Now, the free download is not going to give you the tooling package and all that, but you don't need that for this. I don't have time to show it to you. I can totally explain it to you in after hours. A lot of these answers are probably going to end with, I can show you in after hours.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that will take a long time to kind of dig through. You can also, Cinema 4D has some CAD packages or CAD tools that allow you to import those things directly as well. Next question.
Moving on, the next question comes to us from Alex again. And this time he asks, advice on working with objects with semi-transparent or glass panels and elements.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so I'm assuming you're asking your question for the end result in Substance. So when you saw me do that import on Substance, it asked you to pick a template. In Substance, there will be several templates. That was metallic metal roughness, but there's a metallic metal roughness with alpha channel. So if you want to map a glass material on that, you would just choose the alpha channel, and then you can put on your smudges and your fingerprints and all that stuff.
Next question.
Again, after hours.
Yeah. Bo Cordell, Charleston, South Carolina. Bo asks, I have a small video switcher on my desk. If I wanted to take photos of it and make a USDZ model, what's the process?
Yeah, so this is where photogrammetry starts to come into play. You can do it with a series of photos or with your phone. For some reason, it is for this morning. I talk about it all the time, but this morning, the Apple tools that are escaping me the name of them anyway, but these are image to geometry or image to model, and basically it is Apple is released an API that will let you do that. Now, right now, the best way to do that is there's an app called PhotoCatch. It is okay in the fact that they charge you every time you want to export a model, which I find to be kind of annoying. But it will use the API to do that. I think we'll see more of those. You can, if you have a developer account with Apple, you can download there's literally a shell command that you can run that will go grab all those photos and create a 3D model out of them. So Apple has built that as a reference for developers, so they understand how it works. Did we get it's not
recap.
No, it's not recap. There's the Apple API for it, and it's just I should search for it when we're answering a question. I'll give it back to you. I don't know why I can't think of it at the moment, but there's an API for developers that Apple has put out. That again, there's a shell. If you look at the WWDC videos, you'll see it there, and we'll find it. But that's one way you can use it now.
Object capture. I'm going to put a link to the WWDC.
I don't know why I had it stuck in my head of image capture, and I knew it wasn't that. Object capture is the API that Apple has built that they've made available to developers to build models from photos. They didn't build their own app, I think partially because it allows the developers, it gives them a space to go do it themselves. But you can run a shell command that will use that API and build models. And what you can do is you need to make sure you cover the model. Now, if you want to use an app, there's also programs like Metashape and Reality Capture that are both designed to do this as well. What they don't take advantage of that I know of yet is they don't take the LiDAR data. So if you take it with your iPhone, if you have an iPhone 13 or whatever, you take those images with the iPhone, Apple's object capture will actually take into account the LiDAR information as well as the image information and put those together to create a model. Now, there's also one called Clone, Clone, that you print out a reference image, and then you take the pictures around it, and Clone will build it. And it's probably, as far as an app goes, that it takes a little bit more work to do, but it's probably the best one out there to grab onto an object relatively quickly with your phone. So those would be the things that I would look at. Next question.
Courtney Gooden in Hollywood in the panel says, is there a browser plugin cross-platform that can display USDZ files?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so there's on Windows, it's sparse. On obviously on a Mac, you can just open it up preview. But there's one that's called AS Pose, POSE. So AS POSE. I'll put the link in the thing. It's just you just drag your USDZ file onto the thing and it shows it to you. It's very basic.
And I believe that you can open it in Safari at this point. I'm not certain of that, but I believe it's Safari on a Mac. Yeah, go ahead, Courtney.
But there's no browser plugin that lets you rotate it and it displays the textures as well.
Not on Windows.
And, that converts it to OpenGL or something that browsers can deal with.
I don't think so. I don't think so right now. I mean, it's not like some of the web activations. Again, I think for a browser, I think it's Safari, and I think that this is going to be a really interesting model because the USDZ support it's an open format, so Apple's not controlling that format, so people could build those. I think that it's early on. There's no reason that it couldn't be built for a browser. It's not like Apple's controlling that. No one's done it yet. And one of the things we want to do is show people early, like, hey, this is coming. This is going to be a big deal. I will say that I think that, we'll see it across the OS. Like right now, I could text you that model that we downloaded, and you could, on an iPhone, you could just open it up and it'll pop up in front of you. So I think that we're seeing, we see it in Motion, we see it in Final Cut. The thing that I'm really tracking is Keynote. If it ever ends up in Keynote, the demand for clip art, 3D clip art for Keynote will be intense. Like as much as you could possibly imagine, because imagine having $10 things that are a whole bunch of Office items and $10 collections that are a bunch of other things. And the reason I want to show it now is I want, hopefully some people in our group get excited and start building stuff that would work for that. Because if we put out these things, or if people put those things out right as it becomes available, it's when everyone's trying to figure it, like, what does this do? And they go buy a bunch of little packages, and so someone is going to make a lot of money by having those packages. And none of the models, one thing we noticed is none of the models are ready for this. You can go to TurboSquid and download the USDZ stuff and nothing works. So nothing that's out there is going to work nicely. And the concept of charging $30 a model is going to become obsolete really quickly, because people are going to be buying USD model $10 a collection within 2 years. So I would not want to have stock in.
Well, that would be for clip art type stuff.
It'll be for everything over time. It'll be clip art at first, but eventually every manufacturer is going to want to have everything in USDZ, and they're going to put them up like Clarity. They're going to put them up because that's the next generation of how to show off your product to your clients. Is they can literally, with the one that's on the Clarity website, you can walk up to a pole and just put it on the pole and say, what would it look like if it was on this pole? What would it look like on my, and you want, and remember that this is just the 3D tools. What happens when you have programmers in Reality Creator, which is so Reality Creator lets you add behaviors and tie that into code. So for instance, what if you could have a Mix Pre 3 that sat in front of you, and when you turn the dials, it actually did exactly what a Mix Pre 3 would do, out. And so you have, like, I'm going to hook a mic into here, and I'm going to have a speaker come out of here, and then I'm just playing with it. And you can play with all the interfaces and do all the other things and learn how that works before you even own it. With annotations and video and everything else. From a training perspective, it's pretty exciting. Next question.
Next one comes from Jason Panks in Nashville. It had the most votes. With USDZ, could someone take a real life object and then 3D print a copy of it?
Go ahead, Chris.
Yes. Well, here's what I found out. I don't know from a UDZ if you can just load that into your 3D printer. I don't have one. But what I did notice is when I brought UDZs back, when we were having the issue with Alex and the scale issue, I was bringing those files back into the 3D packages to find out what was going on. Cinema 4D opens a UDZ file as like a dumb OBJ type file where it's just everything's compressed down. But what I noticed is when I opened it up back up in Modo, I got the entire folder structure with all the UVs. So all that traveled with it. So and then once you're in something like Modo, then you can just take that and export it out to your printer.
Yeah, and you would probably export it out as an STL file is typically how you would take that. And if it was watertight, it would definitely print. I haven't tried printing this one. I'm now curious. I might try to print out that model. Next question.
Alex 4D Goldner back again with tips to deal with or simplify CAD models of buildings.
Go ahead, Chris.
That might be one for Jesse to answer as well, but whatever package you're in, it's going to be as simple as you make it. I mean, you can have something that's very overcomplicated, but now you're into the realm of having a high resolution mesh and a low resolution mesh. Generally what happens is people build high resolution meshes. They get their normals off from that. They bake their normals out, and then they apply those to a low resolution mesh like game engine stuff. That way you have a very detailed model on a very small package.
Go, Jesse. Did you have anything to add then?
Yeah, I think a lot of times if you inherit a model from a company, it can be very detail oriented. It might have all the mechanical systems in there. I found if you need something simple, a lot of times you're better off building it again from scratch and building it with something like SketchUp that is just putting in minimal amounts of geometry in there. So I've not had most of the time when I get a file from somebody, it's got way too much detail, and it's so much more work to remove that detail than to build it from scratch.
Yeah, and again, the thing that we've noticed is lots of little details that are running next to each other creates a lot of aliasing, and that's with every real-time package. So you have to be very careful. If you buy a high-res building model, they'll put little rounds on all the little windows and all the little details, and all of that will alias. And so you have to go in and kind of reduce that to what looks right in what you're doing. And that's still a little bit of work to make that work. Next question.
Alex 4D's back with, has anyone incorporated weather effects such as clouds and fog into USDZ scenes?
We haven't done that yet. In a real-time environment, those things tend to be a little bit more difficult, but there's no reason why you couldn't have text, geometry maps. Or texture maps that had enough. When you're looking at a lot of this stuff, it may create so much geometry to do it well. I think that would be the difficult.
Well, it's important to point out that a USDZ scene is a self-contained thing. You can't add to it. You can add around it. You can put a USDZ in a scene, but you can't add anything to the USDZ once it's baked.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not for USDZ, but if you want weather changes in a model, Twinmotion does a really good job with that. It's got a slider that lets you change the season, the sun, grow the vegetation. So there's some packages out there. It'll be nice once they start porting things to more other programs or USDZ, but for now, at least for weather change, that's a pretty good package.
Absolutely. Next question.
Alex 4D's back with advice on incorporated 360 or 180 video into a USDZ experience.
I think it's coming. Obviously, you have it. You can put a 360 experience in, and then move those models inside of that scene. And I think that what we're of course stepping around right now is the fact that these tools are in motion in Final Cut, and the fact that we assume that there's more and more AR development coming from Apple. We're probably seeing those are going to be incredible authoring engines for any AR that Apple may do in the future. So it's a useful pipeline to know right now. And again, there's opportunities. I think that what we want to look at is the low-hanging fruit is that you can build models that your clients can use. You can build models that a lot of other things can make possible. And so you can use USDZ very effectively right now. As we move more towards AR and as it gets into a wider thing, it'll become more useful. As AR starts to really pick up, it'll become very useful. And so building these skill sets and using it right now is hard, but it means that as the other technologies, I talk about it a lot, that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Well, there's a huge opportunity coming, and there's a lot of preparation that's required to get good at it. And the opportunity for us to do that is right now. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, could USDZ models be used for live broadcast or theater graphics?
Eventually, when the tools that are rendering make them available. There's no reason that it's a real-time renderer, especially with M1s. There's no reason why it can't render pretty complex models out in real time. I'm doing this on a 4-year-old iMac, and it's perfectly real-time. It's just a matter of the renderers supporting it. Next question.
And the last one we have in the queue right now, Jason Panks in Nashville says, does the Mac OS Monterey make working with USDZ easier than previous Mac OS versions?
I haven't found that it made any difference at all, for Monterey. So I think that the M1s make a difference, that they're a little bit more sporty when it comes to that. But I think that from a pure, like what I just showed you in motion and everything else that I built that's all in Catalina. So it's a couple of generations back, and it's working just fine. So this stuff Apple's been slowly rolling this out for years. So it is a lot of that support is there. And I think that's I do think that we're seeing probably one of the most comprehensive rollouts of any technology ever. And that's why I keep on going. You got to pay attention right now. Like this is coming, and it's rolling in really, really slowly and with mass. And sure, it's still early on, and things don't work perfectly, and that's when you want to get into it. When once it's easy, everyone will do it. And you want to. It's not. The tools will get better, but the thought process of how to use it and how to work with it and everything else is stuff that you can develop right now. And again, it's useful today. I mean, it is really is a game changer for people who just want, like, for instance, again, Clarity is using this as I just want to have another picture of my object in another angle. Just as that tool, it's a game changer of just being able to go and capture a new angle and send it out rather than having to do a new photo, shoot of it, is pretty profound. You were going to say something, Courtney?
Yeah, I was just wondering, didn't this start with Pixar owning the intellectual property for USD?
Yeah, I don't know who owns the intellectual property, but yeah, but I think that I thought that it was
whether Disney had their hands in this or not.
Yeah, no, I don't know, but when you think about what's possible too is when you think about USDZ, when we go back to Disney, what if you had Marvel characters or ships or all kinds of other things that you could have as part of that puzzle? I think is it all, as add-ons. And then of course I think it would need to be more widely available, but NFTs is an obvious market for a lot of this stuff. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to point out before we get off is one of the biggest frustrations we had from this project, not from the client's end, but from the technology that we currently have, is for us to do that top level USDZ of the pole with all the modules on it. That required a different USDZ for each module that contained the items that Alex wanted to see for that module. So for like example, we had the Node S, this part, but this and this cable were separate. Those had to be separate files. They combined those in motion. When if Apple's listening, whenever they decide to open up that file format to where you could bring the entire top level in the motion, see into the USDZ and turn things on and off, boom. I mean, at that point, it becomes very, very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so it's early days. But I think that there is, I went from thinking about USDZ to using it almost every day during this project. I mean, I had another project that I had that I got Jesse to model some models for me, and it was amazing, because what I did is I can't show that one, but I had the objects, and I was able to in motion just rotate them around to what I want. And then I just kept cameras for all the angles that I want to reproduce. And then I just rendered those out with alpha channels and put them into Keynote. Now I can see somewhere in the future, I won't have to render those out and put them in Keynote. I just drop the model into Keynote and I just rotate the object to where I want it. And then let it and drop it, or be able to rotate it during the presentation. All those things are coming, I think. I don't know, I don't know that, but I think that that's part of a future that's kind of coming down the path. And again, I think it'll be pretty exciting when it does. So any last words from Chris, Alex, or Jesse? Nothing? Yeah. So this is an introduction. You say, Alex?
Just to say that I understood in theory that Motion would be able to use USDZ, but by actually having a real job to do with it, it's actually how I taught myself how to use it.
Yeah.
And before I said, well, I'll learn it when I need to learn it. I mean, obviously I know Motion well, so that helped.
Right.
But I didn't really know how, the interactivity of how it was all going to work. But it's straightforward if you know Motion.
Right. And the thing that I haven't built as an example yet that I want to do, and I got to talk to Alex about it a little bit, is the idea of remember that you can export these out as generators to Final Cut. So you can have a 3D model that has rotation, that has, it explodes out, comes back in. All those things can be built with just little sliders in motion, export it out. So now you have you have a video editor that just opens it up in Final Cut and goes, oh, I just want it to explode. And all they have is a slider, and the whole thing animates out and animates back in. And the video editor doesn't need to know anything about 3D to build their own 3D animation as they need it with the angles that they need. And that's pretty revolutionary. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to point out is currently the only other way to do this inside of a package for video editing is to use Element 3D inside of After Effects. So the fact that they can do this in motion is pretty awesome. Black Magic, I need this in Fusion.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going to be left behind if you don't add this in.
And I do think that because of the efforts that have been put in, I think that USDZ is most likely going to win the format war as we go. The next format war. There's a new format. OBJ at one point was that. FBX was at one point that. There's a bunch of different formats that have but this is the one because of the mass market, because it can be. I think that you're going to end up going to Amazon at some point and having USD models of almost everything at scale. You just, what does this look like on my table?
Well, the reason for that is those FBX models and the OBJs, they send materials with them as a separate file, but they don't always load.
Yeah, that's the trick.
USDZ, the materials are just there. There's no question.
And the lighting. And remember that we're only using the lighting, the textures and the models. You can embed animations into the USDZ as well. So we haven't done that yet. So
yes, and what you saw for the Clarity module is me learning Substance Painter in just a couple months. Imagine what happens in 2 years when you know how to use it.
Well, and one of the reasons, again, the reason we're doing the second hour is because we're going to do some sessions in after hours where we play with these models and we kind of work through that process. And I think that when there's 10 of us or 20 of us or 50 of us that know how to use it, the learning speed within the group will accelerate, and then we will be way farther along than anybody else in the world. That's the opportunity right now. Go ahead, John.
So this file's approximately 50 meg, just under.
Yep.
What's taking up all that space? I mean, the textures and everything else.
Textures.
What's the majority of that? Textures?
Yeah. It's a pretty small model with just a geometry. And the reason those textures take it up is because that's the minimum size we can make them to fit it into 50 megs. But that's why you can zoom so close up to them and it still looks sharp. We could definitely lower that resolution, and it's not just, when you look at that texture, it's not just one image. Every one of those textures is 4 or 5 images. It's the bump map and the normal 5 images, bump map, ambient occlusion, color, specular, normals, all of those things are part of that calculation. So there's 5 textures for every surface.
And the 50 megabyte cap is just for the phone. It's not for motion. I mean, I could make them a 400 megabyte USDZ for motion.
Can't wait to do my rocket on this. Can't wait.
Yeah, exactly. It's really cool. All right. Well, thanks to the producers. Great questions. First hour and second hour. Great work. And thanks to the panelists. We can't do this without you. And really appreciate the contribution that you bring to it. And tomorrow we'll talk about Office Hours 2.0. We'll talk about the HDR stuff. We'll talk about how Zoom OSC and all of the different Isadora and Universe are all coming together. How was the editing experience, Stuart?
It was fun. I can see that there are still a few teething problems,
which we expect for at least the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, but it was nice to be able to provide feedback back to Andy, and for Andy would tell me if it was helpful to him and what have you. And of course, every one of us who has a go at it is going to provide different information based on their own experiences. So that's going to build a stronger platform for everybody in the long term.
Absolutely. So we're slowly going. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. And then remember that we're going to be talking about Zoom events and Zoom conferences with special guests on Friday. So stay tuned for that. All right.